It's time now for the political analysis of Fromm and Fuller. Al Fromm, former political advisor to President Bill Clinton, and Craig Fuller, former political advisor to both Presidents Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Good morning, all. Craig, I'd like to start with you this week. It's been a busy time in Washington, and I would just like to list three things that I'd love to get your response from, as well as Al's. The first, and perhaps the most important, is that the House and Senate Republicans abandoned a bipartisan compromise that it would have dramatically increased border security, limited the number of asylum seekers, and at the same time blocked additional funding for Ukraine. The second was the Republican House failing to impeach Biden's Homeland Security chief. And finally, the D.C. Circuit Court's decision to reject Trump's claim of absolute legal immunity as he moves quickly to claim the GOP nomination for president. What are your thoughts?
Well, it was certainly an active week in Washington, although obviously not a lot got done. And I think what we're seeing, and we've talked about it here, is a real failure of the leadership, Republican leadership on the House, to be able to reach agreement on critical issues, and really a failure between Senate and House to agree on major issues, to the extent that I think when it comes to immigration, Republicans in the Senate who got to a place where they could agree to a compromise decided if it wasn't going to go anywhere in the House, they weren't going to take the heat back home. And so here we sit. I really think that the country has to look at Washington, which I don't think it holds in high regard to begin with, and ask whether this is just completely broken. And this week would suggest it's close to completely broken. Whether they can recoup or not, I'm not really sure. You know, I was reflecting on all of this, and I really think Trump seems to receive credit and seems to want credit for creating some of this chaos. I cannot imagine him being reelected president, and I think until we get past the November national elections, we're going to have a lot of chaos. The one thing that gives me hope is that should he be defeated, it will probably be the end of his ever appearing on a ballot again, and we can get back to some kind of more normal arrangement. The Republican Party really today is just a group of factions, and they're at war with each other. There are those who are going to support Trump no matter what Trump does. It's a small percentage of the total number of voters in the country, but they can have an impact on these primary campaigns, and they seem to be determined to give him a shot at being nominated again. But I keep saying if he gets to the national convention, because every week something else happens. He clearly is running out of funds at some point if these court settlements continue to go against him, and hundreds of millions of dollars have to be paid just to appeal the case. This is becoming a steeper and steeper climb for him. There's also a whole question of how the Republican Party is going to really withstand this out through the course of this year. There's a national convention. I don't think Trump has any interest in spending money for 4 days of putting other people at the podium. He probably would like the one night when he's nominated, but it's those kinds of events typically rally the party regulars to get out and support their candidate. And I don't know that they have the funds to even pull this off. The National Republican Committee is reporting a lower balance in their accounts than they've seen in many years. State party organizations are going broke. So while there's loyalty to Donald Trump, there's not much Trump loyalty to the party, and that's going to precipitate just a very unusual campaign season should he receive the nomination. It seems like, however, that Republicans in Congress are almost frozen to inaction until we get a resolution as to whether Trump can win an election again.
Al, busy week. Probably pretty good for the Democrats. What do you think?
I don't think it was good for the Democrats. It's terrible for the country. And unlike what seems to be the new version of the Republican Party, what's good for the country ought to be good for the Democrats. And when things are bad for the country, it's not good for the Democrats. Trump, who set out to blow up American politics, has done a pretty good job of it. He's really destroyed his party. It's different than anything I have ever experienced. I've been in national politics for more than half a century. I've dealt with presidents of both parties. I've had big fights with presidents of the opposite party, or been on the other side. When Craig and Ronald Reagan came to the White House, I was in the House leadership, working with Tip O'Neill and Gillis Long. We had a brutal fight in 1981 over the budget and the tax bill. I know on our side, while we disagreed vehemently with Reagan's course, we never thought what he was doing wasn't what he thought was in the best interest of the country. And I suspect in the White House, the Reagan people thought, Tip has a different point of view, but he wants good for the country as well. Mm-hmm. That's different with Trump. He's explicit about it. That's the most stunning thing. He's explicit about it. We have a national crisis at the border. Both parties have had a big role in creating it. They like to blame the other party for it, but in fact, it's a bipartisan problem. And it looked like we were going to get a resolution to it. But Trump goes to his cronies in the House and says, in his puppet speaker, and says, let's blow up this deal because I want the issue in the fall. The country be damned. 8 more months of, and really probably longer than that, of an uncontrolled border is fine with me because I can use it as a political issue. So that's the difference to me. Jack Kemp and I used to work together on a lot of stuff, and sometimes we had differences. But what he'd always say to me is, just remember, we're political adversaries. We're not enemies. The Russians are our enemy. One of the incredible outcomes of what Trump has done is he has made the Republican Party the ally of our enemy, the Russians. Ukraine is going to lose this war because the Republicans, particularly in the House, but really even in the Senate, just absolutely refuse to move ahead with aid. The great oracle of the Republican Party, Tucker Carlson, is in Moscow with Putin now. Trump, basically has always been pro-Putin. And the stunning thing is that nobody in the Republican Party will stand up to him. It's the most stunning thing I can just imagine. Look, the House is dysfunctional. We've known that. They have a small majority, and they've gone through the speaker crisis. They can't pass anything that has any chance of becoming law. But to be honest with you, the Senate, where I worked for 10 years in an institution that I revered when I was up there, is worse. Mitch McConnell is a disgrace to America. Think about what just happened. The president sends up a supplemental bill, a spending bill that contains aid to Ukraine and Israel and Taiwan. the Republican says we won't. McConnell and the Republicans say we won't consider it unless you include some provisions to control the border. And so we make a deal. One of the most conservative and seemed to me principled Republicans, I don't know him, but James Langford of Oklahoma, cuts a deal. And it's a good deal. I mean, it's one that probably most Democrats will have a hard time swallowing, but they did because it's important for the country that we control the border. That deal was not even made public, the details of it, before the Speaker of the House, at the behest of Donald Trump, said it's dead on arrival in the House. And what happens to the Senate? What are their principles? They just run scared. They run scared. And when the vote to consider this bill comes up, the compromise that they asked for and they negotiated, 4 Republican senators voted for it. And the leader, McConnell, voted against it. And then Schumer says, well, okay, let's just do the foreign aid because you say you're for that. And what's the Republican response? We can't do foreign aid unless we do the border. I mean, it's a disaster for the country. From my perspective, you asked about the Democrats. Question I have is, with the Republicans behaving like this, why can't the Democrats do better? The reason the Democrats aren't doing better is because we have a president who has a lot of skills and has a good record, but has a very difficult time doing what Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton and Barack Obama did very well, which is laying out a national narrative that puts all of what's happening in context and helps people understand what's really going on, and also offers a vision for the future. What all that means to me, and this is why I'm worried, is that voters can't help but lose faith in the body politic, really in both parties. That's going to invite a number of people to vote for third-party candidates. And that's the Trump strategy, as I said last week. Trump can't win a two-way race. That I'll agree with Craig on. But if the anti-Trump vote is split, he can win. So a bad week for Washington, a worse week for our country.
Craig, that was a sobering assessment. Is there any chance that you see that some Trump supporters, for example, will be looking at this failure of the immigration reform package and start to understand the details and how much was given up? I mean, Al underplayed this. This was a major, major compromise on the part of the Democrats.
I suppose so, but I worry that much of Trump's support is not really policy based. I mean, Trump doesn't really have policies that are, the been traditional Republican approaches to things. It's all about Trump and getting him back into office. So I think that there certainly are among Republicans. I think it's Republican women, Republicans in, obviously the people with higher education in these early primary contests have moved away from Trump. But and I think as the weight of the burden he carries and some of these legal challenges grows, saw today a suggestion that the Supreme Court, before they come to a conclusion about whether Trump can be held off the ballot, will indicate, we've talked about this here before, will indicate that, well, the Congress needs to take this up because that's the route that's prescribed in the 14th Amendment, where if somebody has committed acts against the United States, that they cannot be on the ballot unless Congress by a 2/3 vote approves them. Well, that's going to be an interesting contest. if they actually throw this to the Congress, I suspect the Democrats then have to figure out whether or not they would rather face Trump or someone else. But so there's just a lot of different steps here. I do want to go back though to something that Al said, because it's part of both of our pasts, and it has to do with Tip O'Neill and really the concept of mutual respect. I get asked a lot by people, how is this ever going to get resolved? How are things going to get better? And it's like almost like a relationship between two people. Unless there's mutual respect, how is it going to get better? When President Reagan was shot and he recovered, one of the first people he met with officially was Tip O'Neill. And Ronald Reagan met with Tip O'Neill wearing basically his bathrobe. He was still convalescing, if you will, and it was in the residence of the White House. It was one of the most remarkable meetings I ever participated in, because it was two people, as Al said, who looked at the country differently, but had great respect for each other. And at one point, Tip O'Neill asked about a chandelier that was in the White House, because I guess it matched one that was in the Speaker's office. And Ronald Reagan said, "Come on, let's go look at it." And so up the two of them go to find the chandelier that Tip O'Neill wanted to see. So with the weight of a massive budget and tax plan hanging over them both, these two people had a very personal relationship and worked through issues together. Mm. So when you think of that moment, and then you look at the kind of actions that occurred in the Senate, as Al accurately described them, where Republicans seem to just game the Democrats and renege on commitments and any sense of compromise. We're just at a place that makes this dysfunctional. And until we can find and elect people who show some measure of respect for others in Congress and even in their same party, I don't know where we stand. It stands in contrast. If people haven't read, they should look at or listen to Governor Wes Moore's speech yesterday, and he's got another statement today about his plan. But he talks about partnership. He talks about safety. He talks about education. He talks about things that matter to people, and he talks about working with the elected officials in Maryland. Yes, there are Democratic majorities, but he's not leaving people out, and he's not chiding the other side. He's laying out a plan, and that kind of individual, I think, gives me hope that once we get through this, this is like a virus in our system, and it's going to be rid from our system, either by a defeat of Trump in November, or by his last stand as an elected official, which would be a torturous thing to go through. But it is going to end, and I think when it ends, I hope people of real quality will step up and seek office, and I really hope voters will take a hard look at what's this all about. You may not like Washington, but if you send people to Washington who behave the way the current cast of characters is behaving, you're not exactly on a path to improve our national condition.
Al, you have the last word.
Trump really, to me, he so destroyed the Republican Party. And America needs two great parties. But Trump's vote is a cult. And I wish, I hope Craig's right and the party can bounce back at some point. But it's pretty scary when, in Nevada, none of the above beats Nikki Haley 2-1, because when she's the only person on the ballot. That's the Trump vote coming out. I agree. Trump doesn't have any, probably even close to a majority of the country. He has a big enough vote to be dangerous in a three-way race, but he does have overwhelming support in what's left of the Republican Party. No question about that. Think about where Trump has left his party. Had no platform in 2020. It really has no legislative agenda. I don't know what the House wants to do. Clearly, it has not displayed any principles, and that could not have been more evident than this week. It seems to only want to do what Trump wants to do. And as far as I can tell, his agenda, and he says this at every rally, for the next 4 years is retribution. You know, I mentioned earlier about Mitch McConnell. I used to admire McConnell, and he's the longest serving party leader in the history of the Senate. And he's clearly a good tactician. But if you really look back at what he's done over the last 8 or 10 years, he has become the worst kind of partisan hack. And not without, and I think this, the good thing about what happened this week is it really brought that out to light, you know, in such a concentrated way that people are going to have to remember it. You know, what has McConnell done? I mean, you can start with what he did about Merrick Garland as the Supreme Court justice, where he, you know, one way of denying the will of the people is not allowing the president they elected to appoint a justice of the Supreme Court. And he did that because he couldn't do it in the last year of an administration. It took him about 28 days to confirm Amy Coney Barrett in the last months of the Trump administration. He had a chance to end this nightmare with the Trump impeachment, the second impeachment. And what does he do? He votes to acquit, and then he goes to the floor and makes a speech about how terrible Trump was and how all the awful things he did. I mean, and now this week, blowing up this border deal. I mean, my God, that is not the record of a national leader who has the country's interest at heart. To me, the most important thing, I guess, is we've got to somehow get through all this. And it's so important to get that next generation of leaders onto the national scene, because with the leadership we have now, and I think the Republican leadership in the Congress is probably the bottom of the barrel, but overall the leadership we have, the country just faces, I think, some very difficult times. But it's a country with great resolve, and over the long haul, I'm sure we'll come out just fine. But boy, the interim could be a difficult time.
That's all the time we have for Al Fromm, Craig Fuller. Thank you so much indeed. We will see you next week.